Thanks, everybody, for that. Good conversations. Representative Greenman, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I figured maybe I will just, instead of ask the questions, I will dig in. I actually know quite a bit about this and spent a lot of time with Representative Niska's, the business partnerships bill, and actually spent a lot of time consulting employment lawyers who work on this. And so just want to point out the questions that I had, because it's a hard one. The question I asked about the research and development of the creation, analysis, or modification of confidential, proprietary, or trade secret information is a hard one because the answer is it's not defined. Confidential or proprietary, my understanding is talking to most employment lawyers, a judge would assume is anything an employer marks confidential. So it's not just the whole point of this, as it was presented to me at the beginning of the conversation over a year ago, was the idea here was what we're trying to do is have a narrow carve out for businesses who want to protect their intellectual property, want to protect their trade secrets, want to protect, for lack of a better term, like the secret sauce of both the recipe and how you make it. And if that is the issue, this is the Trojan horse. This language says an employer, for instance, could mark an employee handbook as confidential, and if somebody is doing in HR doing the work to create that handbook, if every email is marked confidential, they are certainly creating, analyzing, or modifying a confidential information. And the fact that it says research and development, which is not defined, or the creation, analysis, or modification of confidential, proprietary, or trade secret information, which is also not defined, is a huge problem, which most employment lawyers said to me essentially means that this $120,000 mark is actually would apply to most people in most companies. And so instead of having a complete ban, or instead of having a ban that only affects a small number of workers, we're talking about carving out people, white-collar workers, but at this point we're talking about a relatively large set of workers who, for the last year and 10 months, have had the economic benefit, the control and freedom to not have a non-compete. Now this would say, in the interest of a very small exception, as it's been sold to me, be a very, very large set of people. The other thing I will say, the other question I was going to ask is about this budgeted compensation of $120,000. Compensation, when I talk to both the department, I talk to lawyers, employment lawyers, is not defined. And so $120,000 salary, which is what we ended up with, salary plus bonus is I think what's in the House position. Salary is where we have been talking, and I believe where the Senate position is, or the Senate amendment is. Salary is something we know. It's something workers know and agree to. Compensation could include health benefits. It could include retirement. It also, when we're talking about some of these workers, could include stock options. What if those stock options are unrealized and they never realize them? Is that part of compensation? That is, to me, a huge concern because, one, we're talking about $120,000, which is too low. But I think beyond that, we're talking about something that this may not be $120,000. It might be you make $80,000 and have $40,000 or $50,000 of compensation. So those are just two of the really, really important. Just taking the NISCA or the Business Partnership Bill on its face. The other thing I just want to say, because I think it's really important, we heard a few times, and you have some letters here from both workers who do this work. There's comments that were from the FTC, did an entire rulemaking. 97% of the comments from Minnesota were supportive of a complete ban, a complete federal ban. In Minnesota, we got there first. And this is just a clipping of them. If you go on this QR code, you can read hundreds of stories and comments submitted by Minnesota workers, by Minnesota small businesses in support of banning these restrictive agreements. And one of the things that is concerning to me is that I hear a lot like we should take this offline. I hear a lot we should do this, negotiate this. The reality is that this is on our agenda. This is in the House bill because it is a priority of the business partnership. That is the $100 biggest CEOs and senior executives of the largest Minnesota employers in the state. And the partial repeal is what they want because this is control that employers have. It gives them power to restrict their employees from leaving, from going to a competitor, from starting a small business, not trade secrets. Trade secrets are actually very well protected, and every trade secret lawyer I talk to, there is a thriving business. But what it does is it limits worker mobility. It keeps them from taking that promotion, and so will suppress wages. That's what the Federal Reserve has said. It keeps folks from starting a small business, and that's what the research says, and some of the research is in your packet, that it actually stifles exactly what we say that we want to create, which is incubate small businesses. But if you can't leave the biggest business to go start your own business without taking a year or 2 years off, sidelined, you may not do it. In 2023, we said, let's follow the lead of the states who have no non-competes, the ones, for instance, that are incubating Silicon Valley, the biggest tech companies in the world. If we want to follow that, what we have heard from Silicon Valley is this is actually an asset, not a liability. The reason it's an asset is that those workers, and I heard this, I had a lobbyist come and actually tell me, who's not working on this, at the Indian Chamber of Commerce, they were talking about how there's actually recruiting these workers, these high-tech engineers are coming to Minnesota because they can go from Ecolab to Medtronic or somewhere else. That's a benefit to workers. It's a benefit to our economy. It may not be a benefit to those biggest corporations who can't lock people in, who can't suppress wages by not having to compete with a different offer, but it certainly is a benefit to Minnesota. And our job here is not to represent the biggest businesses behind closed doors. Our job is to represent the economy, the workers, the families in Minnesota. And what we have done in 2023 is done that and said we will not have these restrictive covenants and we won't limit the freedom of employees to go where they want to go to take a job because they don't like their boss, because they get a promotion, because they just want to start out on their own. So we are here with language in front of us that the House passed, which is still way too restrictive, but the House Democrats, DFLers, who 67 of us voted for an amendment to take that language out, said we got to get a labor budget, we got to get a jobs budget, we have to keep the lights on, we have to make sure we're enforcing the labor protections, we are doing the small business growth. We did that. But now we're hearing that that language, which means for white-collar workers who still don't have any power in their giant company, who make $200,000 and $250,000 a year, like, I've never made that much money in my life. But what I do know from some of those folks I talk to is when they're negotiating with their boss at you name the company, they don't have any power either. That's the economy we live in. It is rigged. It is not a level playing field. And so our job is to say, how do we ensure that we have a level playing field for employees? How do we ensure that we have a level playing field for small businesses? How do we ensure that we are serving the economic interests and not the biggest monopoly interests? So what does that look like? To me, that looks like not carving up protections for those workers, for those small businesses. It also looks like doing this in public. The fact that we don't have public testimony from workers and from small businesses is a problem, because what I know is that we have a political problem here, which is this is something that benefits a large, diffuse set of people who may not have lobbyists here sitting here. They're not represented by a trade association. They're not represented by an organization. They're not represented by a labor union. And so they just know it's a good idea. I've gotten a lot of emails about it, but they're not sitting here today. What we do know is that the corporations are very well represented by very good lobbyists who are in all of our conversations. They're in the halls, they're in our negotiations. They wrote this bill, 1768, and they're not the ones who should be negotiating for the people of Minnesota. It is us, and we should be listening to those workers. So what I would say is, one, I am glad we're having this conversation in public. I am glad we are having this conversation amongst us and not behind closed doors. I do think that as we move forward, we should have public testimony, because we should actually hear from the people who are impacted by this, and we should hear from those businesses and corporations too. Because I have asked a lot of questions to those businesses, and I have said, give me one example of your business having somebody leave from one place to another and not being able to protect that with trade secrets, with non-solicitation agreements, with non-disclosure agreements. And it's been a year and 10 months, and I have not heard an answer. But what I do know is this is a very nice tool that employers like to use to control the freedom of their employees, to control and to stifle their competition. And we shouldn't be carving it up without worker voice, and we should be negotiating in public on this. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will save the rest of my comments for the next time we talk about this.
Okay, I do